Hey guys, I want to welcome you to the weekly Wednesday for the Financial Freedom newsletter, where every week, every Wednesday, we delve into something inspirational, motivational, something excerpt taken from the Financial Freedom weekly newsletter. Wherever you are, if you're listening on Spotify, on iTunes, Google, be sure to click the like, subscribe, share, comment. And without ado, let's get into the show. Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. And I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I'm always growing and expanding the podcast, variety of guests, doing different things on the cutting edge and sharing those. And so today I'm really happy to have Cobin Soelberg, and he's actually a lawyer. He's an MD, JD, and he's been on a number of platforms, including Kevin MD, and I'm happy to get him on the podcast, and it's going to be a great discussion.
Thank you so much for having me today, Chris.
Yeah, I know. So tell, the audience about your background, your story, and we'll get started.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you. Yeah, so it's, the medicine and law thing is a little interesting. It's way back when I was a philosophy major in college and really enjoyed it, and had one of my philosophy professors really encourage me to think about law school in addition to med school. And, this was like 2 decades ago when it just wasn't as common. And I started med school, and my deans knew I was interested in it, but I sat down with one of my deans and said, I'm really still interested in going to law school. I'm still interested in doing policy and other things. And she said, sure. And I remember this moment because I was like, oh crap, like I actually have to go do it now. So I took a 3-year leave of absence between my second and third year of med school, went to law school at UPenn, came back and finished medical school in Utah. And then I actually ended up back at Penn for my anesthesia residency, in large part because of my time and experience in Philadelphia during law school. I started my career in academic anesthesia out in Portland, really enjoyed it, and pretty quickly started seeing that residents were literally desperate to learn about personal finance, not just investing, but like, what the heck do we do with all of our student loans? What do we, do I really need to get insurance? All that sort of stuff. And I started teaching some classes to the residents, both in the operating room, but there was a CFP, a certified financial planner who worked for the university, who's awesome. I'm still friends with him today. And he started teaching these courses with me to the students and the residents, and they loved them. And Justin is my friend. He made the mistake. He's like, you should think about doing financial advising or financial planning. And so a couple of years ago, I started working on my CFP and got registered to start doing financial planning for other anesthesiologists. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, it's interesting. We know, like we were talking backstage, and we need, I'm glad they have MDs, JDs, and MD MBAs and MD PhDs, because we need different perspective in this, kind of bureaucratic healthcare systems. And what's interesting is, so you're founder of Greeley Wealth Management, and you talk about occupation, disability insurance makes all the difference to high earning workers. Kind of tell us, those stories and, what
Sure. Insurance, like, that's never sexy, right? Like it's way more fun to talk about, like, let's do real estate invest, like options trading, or insurance is boring. And by its nature, it's boring. But I really strongly believe that one of the few things that can derail any physician's financial future is disability. Life insurance is a whole nother, ball of wax, but getting disabled is much more common for most physicians than dying young. And if you don't have adequate disability coverage, that throws your entire financial life into jeopardy. Mm-hmm. And this story is pretty personal for me, Chris, because my best friend, one of my friends from med school who I used to bike and ski with all the time, he got brain cancer. Gosh, it was 7 or 8 years out of residency. So he really hadn't been in practice that long. And he had a seizure while he was at work. He was in the PACU. He lived for another 2 years before he passed away from the cancer, and he never worked another day. He just, as you'd imagine, once you've had a craniotomy thing, like you just don't have everything quite there. But what it did, like watching that, he was able to spend those last 2 years playing with his wife, playing with his friends outside in the mountains, which was like his happy place. And it really struck me because had he not had great disability insurance, that whole thing would have been a whole different process, right?
Yeah, it's very it's for especially for high income, it protects your income, from that catastrophic loss. Recently, the other thing is, and how does Greeley Wealth Management help physicians with disability insurance? Does it just provide education? Do you actually cover it? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in the way that I do financial planning, like I'm only working with physicians, and I'm not selling anything, so I don't sell insurance. But because of my healthcare background, but especially because of my legal background, I can help people review and apply for the best policies. And I've found a couple agents who work primarily with physicians, and they're really good at pushing to get those physicians the coverage that they need. And so a lot of the work I do is finding out what people have. And I'll be honest, a lot of people, I'm always shocked, Chris, by how many people don't have any disability coverage. And I get it. It's really expensive, right? I mean, I know what I'm paying for disability coverage, and it's several $1,000s per year. And so I understand where people are like, well, that's just kind of hard and that seems expensive, and it's not going to happen to me. The other thing that I find a lot is I have to unwind people who have crummy coverage. And you talked about own occupation disability and why that's so important. I do anesthesia. And so if I got injured and I couldn't do something that allowed me to do anesthesia, and I think about, I mountain bike all the time, right? So if I had a really bad hand fracture that didn't allow me to be in the operating room, I can't do anesthesia. And if you don't have the appropriate coverage, the insurance companies will push back and say, well, you can still practice medicine. You might not be able to do anesthesia, but you can still practice medicine. So we're not paying you anything. And that's why that specific type of coverage is so critical for physicians to understand and to have.
The other question I read on the sometimes the physician finance blogs is life insurance. Where does life insurance play? I've talked to different people outside of medicine, and most of the like billionaires and the centimillionaires, they actually, right when their kids are born, they buy life insurance because it's almost like a asymmetric. But where does life insurance play a role?
Yeah, I think so. One of the first questions that I ask people when I'm talking to them about insurance is, what is your biggest asset? And, some people are like, well, I've got some money invested, or I just bought a house. But especially for early career physicians, your biggest asset is your future earnings. Like we've just spent all this time in medical school, all this time training in residency. So it's almost like you're all this kinetic energy, right? Like you have 10 or 15 or 20 years ahead of you of making really, really good income, but you need to protect it. And the way to think about life insurance is if there's, it's quite a bit different than disability insurance in that there's a couple questions to ask. And the first one is does anyone else depend on you for income? So that could be children, that could be a spouse, that could be an unmarried partner, it could be parents you're taking care of. So if anyone's dependent on you for your income, you really ought to think about life insurance. Life insurance is quite a bit simpler than disability, thank goodness, because you're either dead or you're alive. So it's a little bit like, like there's many companies offering great coverage, and you can kind of price shop in different ways. The other thing that I don't think a lot of young physicians understand, especially those who have big loans, and the average student loan burden these days is well over $200,000. It's getting closer to $300,000, which is mind blowing.
Mm.
But if you die and you have federal student loans, the US government does, they're very nice. They write those student loans off. But here's the kicker is that write-off is a taxable event, meaning if the federal government forgives, let's say, $100,000 in loans, you owe taxes on that as if that was income. So your estate, whoever gets your estate, right, whether that's your parents, like, a lot of people are like, well, I'm not married, I don't need life insurance. I'm like, well, if you ended up dying, you'd leave this big tax bill to your parents. That doesn't seem right. And they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece that we haven't talked about yet, Chris, is that, a lot of people put this off and there's always, like, I'm going to do that tomorrow, that kind of syndrome, right? And the best day to get insurance is now, while you're presumably young and you're presumably healthy. A lot of people wait until something comes up, whether it's like a funny heart thing, or they have a back injury or a car accident. Even myself, I had something come up on some of my blood work that I had no idea. And it ended up taking me like 3 years to get coverage that was appropriate. So I really do encourage people to start thinking about this stuff as residents, which, let's be honest, we had a lot more on our plate and a lot more on our mind when we were residents. And that's why I like to share some of these personal stories, because it really does matter. We all think that this won't happen to us, but it does happen to a lot, like we see colleagues all the time.
You always want to have insurance, because it's almost like a bet on the future, and it's almost like, it's money well spent in case of, and the other question is, you're the niche in personal finance, and you paid off, over 500K in student loan debt in 5 years. And so kind of for the younger audience out there, how did you do that? What did you do, and how did you manage it?
Oh, thank you. I love that question. I'm really fortunate in that my wife is on the same page with money, and my wife is a little like, I like to spend on new bikes and new skis and toys. We ended up getting married the first year I finished the first year of attending. She knew that I had a lot in student loan debt, and we made it our top priority to pay off that debt. And so I think what made it doable more than anything else was that we had a why. We said, we want to be out of debt because we want to be able to start building our wealth in other ways. It's really important for us in the future to be able to have better choices, to work less if we want to move and take a job that might pay us less. And that's hard to do when you owe 500 grand in student loans, right? Like, that's just impossible. And so really having that commitment together helped a ton. And so we just figured out, we looked at what it would take to pay off that debt in 4 or 5 years. It's basically reverse budgeting. So we paid that first, and then we maxed out all of our retirement accounts that we had available. And that was quite a few, because both of us worked in academic, and then we lived off the rest. And that's still, coming out of residency, that seemed like a crazy amount of money. And, the first year was tough. Like, it was paying off a ton of debt, but by year 2 or 3, I was shocked by how much we'd saved. And I was shocked by how little we owed in loans. And so I still remember that, physically writing last check just to sort of do it. And it's for those who are still holding student loans, it is hard to describe what a great feeling it is to pay those off. You don't realize what a burden and what a weight is until they're gone.
Yeah. Then you can start, using that money to go towards saving and investing and other investments. One thing is talking about, when you first come out of residency, you get your attending, you spend the first 1 or 2 years just very frugally, live like a resident, and then you get those student loans taken care of, and then you can spend the rest of your career, working on your other financial future. So what's interesting is, so tell the audience about, Greeley Wealth Management, what it is, what, services, products it offers, and how people can learn about you and follow you.
Yeah, I would be happy to. So, it became, like I said, it became really obvious that residents were clamoring for this information. So some of what we do is still go out and give lectures to residents, and do some of the really basic fundamental stuff that I wish we had back during residency. For, my primary clientele are early career attendings, whether that's private practice or academic. I really do believe that physicians are not well served in traditional financial services because a lot of people want to work with us as physicians because we have a high income and we have money to invest. But almost no one understands student loan debt. Almost no one understands how profound our need is for insurance. They don't really get the entire view of what it's like as a physician. And they certainly don't understand the emotional impact. All this time that we spent training, seeing people sick and dying every day, right? Like that sort of impact, missing family events, missing birthdays. They just don't get that piece. They just see us as someone who makes a lot of money and will make them a lot of money. And so the most fun thing that I do, Chris, is I sit down with my clients and I know that as a physician, they're going to be able to meet all of their financial goals like a million times over. So we briefly touch on that, but really we spend the majority of our time talking about values and talking about purpose, because I see my job as helping my colleagues live a life that's filled with purpose and aligned with their priorities in life. And so most of my clients don't want to retire early, but they do want to stop taking overnight call or give away all their weekend work or work a whole lot less, right? Every single one of them, I said, how would it feel to work part-time like 10 years in? And almost to a fault, they're like, you can do that? Like, I can do that? I'm like, yeah, you can do that. Like, I can give away my call? Yeah, you can give away your call. I can make my kids baseball games? Absolutely. That's the part that's super fun. And, each of my clients is unique, of course, and it's really fun to help align that and almost give them permission to do the things they really want to do. You know this well, like taking care of patients and training and doing all of that. We're so used to taking care of everyone else, and we go literally years without asking, like, what do I need? Almost to where we feel it's selfish. And so I get to give them that permission again, which is a ton of fun.
Yeah. I love that. You described, most people don't understand the doctor's journey, and it's great to have people such as yourself championing, giving physicians more time freedom. And
yes, I love that.
Time freedom, you get more emotional freedom, taking some of your financial freedom and moving it into the other buckets. And so how can people contact you, follow you on social media, check out your website, etc.?
Yeah, you can check out my website at Greeley, and that'll be in the show notes, I'm sure. I'm also at Greeley Wealth on Twitter. And then like at the website, you can sign up, you can get on my email listserv, and I send things out to my own clients. I'm usually writing every week or so, just a newsletter, and it's mostly talking about this stuff, this kind of purpose and different kind of freedom, instead of just thinking about financial wealth, thinking about time wealth. So that part's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love that. And time wealth is really, that's kind of the most valuable because you can
everything. That's everything, right? That really is like whatever you want to be doing, how you spend your time is that is your life.
Yeah, so it's what we work for. So
I get geeked up on that. I love it.
So well, thanks for a great conversation, and for all the audience out there, Cobin's resources will be in the links and show notes. Be sure to check out Greeley Management. Also check out his articles as well. Prolific writer. And with that, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today, Chris.
I hope you really enjoyed that wonderful, inspirational, motivational piece. Again, wherever you are listening, if you liked it, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. We're on everywhere: Spotify, iTunes, Google, Amazon, Audible. And without much ado, be sure to thank this show's sponsors, and we'll see you next week.